About 4 years ago, I went to a discipleship school, and 1 month they handed me this book, Healing the Orphan Spirit. I remember grabbing the book and feeling frustrated because I thought, I'm not an orphan. I have 2 loving parents. I have a big family. Why do I need to read this book? As I started reading through the book, I got to chapter 2, which is entitled Life Without a Home. I felt a twinge in my heart as I started reading it, and as I turned the pages of the book, I realized that this was describing how I'd felt my whole life. You know, in my 20s, I'd run from place to place. I'd run from people group to people group. I'd struggled with addiction, with sex, drugs, alcohol, with my sexuality, with my identity. I didn't know who I was or whose I was. I didn't know where I belonged. I didn't know who I belonged to. I had a loving family. I had grown up in the church and learned how to serve God and how to be a good Christian, but never learned about my identity as a son. As I read Healing the Orphan Spirit, I began to learn about sonship. I began to learn that God actually loved me at my worst the same way that he loved me at my best, that his love was unwavering. As I read through this book, the lies that I had believed about God began to be replaced with the truth of who he was. My perspective of him began to change. I began to learn that he's a loving father. He's not a taskmaster that just wants me to perform for him, but he's a loving father who looks at me and says, that is my boy. I began to change my perspective of who God was, and as I learned whose I was, I began to learn who I was. I began to step into my identity as a son. I began to realize that I was not an orphan. I was actually a son who had a seat at the table. My belonging wasn't in a place or a people group. It was in my identity as a son of Father God. I have a seat at the family table with my name on it that no one else can sit in. And I realize that I'm no longer an orphan, but I am a beloved son. And as I learned whose I was, I learned who I was. And when you know who you are, you're unstoppable.